This summer, we enter a new era of Star Wars.
You mean the Dawn of the Star Wars Canon Timeline podcast?
Yeah, sure, that too. But I was obviously talking about the Acolyte. We've got to cover that on the Lorehounds.
Oh, but the Star Wars Canon Timeline podcast is exactly at that point in the timeline, the end of the High Republic, 100 years before the prequel trilogy. We've got to cover it there.
Why not both?
Okay, deal.
It's the first live-action Star Wars outside the Skywalker saga. Nobody can miss this.
Listeners, kick off your hot lore summer weekends with scene-by-scene breakdowns of The Acolyte, found in both the Star Wars Canon Timeline podcast and the Lorehounds Mother feed.
And the Lorehounds Star Wars feed.
Wherever you like to listen, a couple of days after each new episode is released.
Welcome to Silmarillion Stories, where the Lorehounds, your guides to Tolkien's world of Middle-earth. I'm John, and this is our podcast for Of the Return of the Noldor, Part 2, the 15th portion of the Silmarillion. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the Third Battle of Beleriand and the Siege of Angband. If you want to get in on the Tolkien talk, please send an email to lotr@thelorehounds.com. Visit our website, where we have a contact form and a voicemail feature. Or visit our Discord server, which is also linked in the link tree below, where we have a fun and active community with a dedicated Tolkien channel and channels for all of the other shows we're covering. Make sure you stick around to the end of the podcast for programming notes for the rest of June and into July, including House of the Dragon, Doctor Who, and The Acolyte. One more note, if you want to support us directly, head over to patreon.com/thelorehounds for as little as $3 a month. Subscribers, whether you're on Patreon or Supercast, get ad-free and early access to all of our podcasts. Plus, you'll get other bonus content like Second Breakfast, Shireside Chats, and Elevensies. Okay, with me today is a returning guest, Anthony LeDonne from Properly Howard Movie Review and Electric Bookaloo. Anthony, welcome back.
I'm glad to be back, and I've invited a friend.
You have.
Okay. So with me, a repeat guest on Electric Bookaloo from back in the day, Professor Chad Carmichael, professor of philosophy. So, and also a lover of all things Tolkien. Would that be fair to say, Chad?
All things is very broad. I do like Lord of the Rings.
Are you a big Gawain the Green Knight fan? I don't know.
Not a big. I'm largely ignorant. Also,
Beowulf
don't
translations and.
Yeah. No, I also don't like some of the newer shows and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
But,
now the newer shows are coming out soon. Is that right? I'm not up on my latest news, John.
August 29th. We already did a trailer reaction where we did a full like shot by shot analysis of what we think it might be based on Silmarillion nonsense.
And do we have hope that there will be improved writing on this show?
I hope so. It does seem like we're going into the Anatar plotline, if you're familiar with that one from the Second Age writings of Tolkien. So we are going full into Elvish politics next season, and I'm excited for it.
Okay. You know what? I will tune in again. I was not super. I mean, I liked a few episodes. I will say that. I liked a few episodes. I'm willing to give them another shot.
Mm-hmm.
So, man, these elves and their politics, John. I mean, what can you say?
You can say a lot, and that's what we're going to do today.
Okay.
So this is the second part of The Return of the Noldor. It was originally going to be included in my last podcast where I had Tea with Tolkien as a guest, but I tried to outline it as one podcast, and I said this is going to be a 2-hour podcast. So here we are doing part 2, and I'm glad that we did it because it's a really long chapter compared to the chapters coming before this. and there's a lot of meat to it. So we did the whole second Battle of Beleriand last time. We had the Noldor come in. We had Thingol be a little bratty about it. And now we are going into post Noldor arrival. How do they get settled in Beleriand a little bit? And what happens with the different sieges, how the different houses of the Noldor interact. It's a lot of nonsense. So Anthony, I know you've given your background on the Silmarillion before. Can I ask Chad what his background is on the Silmarillion and other Tolkien works?
Well, I'm interested enough that I own a copy, and I have read significant portions of it. But I confess that I'm a little bit of a newbie when it comes to the Silmarillion.
That's okay.
Now, here's the thing about this. I wonder if, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, John, but I wonder if we could talk about a few elements of the first half of the chapter.
Please.
Before we dive into the meat of the second half of the chapter.
Let's do it.
So Chad and I like to argue about Lord of the Rings stuff from time to time. And I've never actually gotten his opinion of Fëanor. I will say this. Fëanor is, I think, the most interesting elf in the whole book.
Mm-hmm.
And he's fascinating. He's a believably gray character. He's got conflicting motives. He's got motives that maybe he doesn't know about, and then he's got motives that are on the surface, and he holds grudges, and he's discerning. And he is the inventor of the Silmarils, which I kind of feel like is the prime mover of the story so far.
Well, that is the name of the book.
Right. So I want to ask you a question about that, but let me just say this. I do feel like the loss of Fëanor in the first half of the chapter is just a magnificent detriment to the story.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I just feel like one of my most interesting characters is gone, and I've got to deal with the aftermath, and the world just seems more dull without Fëanor in it. I don't know. That's my sense of it.
I hear you. You know, to me, Fëanor is a tragic character and he's a complex character, but I think his sons are more interesting to me. Like Maedhros, which we'll talk about in this chapter, is a really interesting character. His motivations are so conflicted. And I love the idea that these sons are trapped by this oath that they made to their father and that they reaffirmed in his dying wishes. And the different ways that different sons of Fëanor deal with that. Caranthir is so different from Maedhros in that. And we'll see how these different factions shake out. I think especially...
Well, Caranthir is just a punk. I just...
He is.
He's just kind of an ass. That's
and
my
he
sense
continues
of it.
to get into punkish antics.
Fëanor was the same, but he had these amazing creative virtues to go with all of his punkiness.
But he did his job already, right? Like he can't ever make that again. He made that very clear.
Okay, interesting.
Could never make anything like the Silmarils again.
Right, but he can create all kinds of havoc.
He can, and his sons will continue to do that. But we've also got two other factions that we're starting to see how those factions start to fit into Beleriand, right? That's the point of this second half of the chapter. Can the House of Finarfin separate itself enough from the House of Fëanor to intermingle with the Sindar elves? And that's a tough question.
Chad, you've read you started. I know that you started with the beginning of the chapter. What was your feeling about the loss of Fëanor?
Goes by pretty quickly, but I agree it's a huge deal, and he's probably. I think I agree with you. Maybe the most compelling character in the Silmarillion, and I just love.
Now wait a second. I said most compelling elf in the Silmarillion.
Yeah, fair enough.
Most compelling character.
Who's your most compelling character? Hold on there. Now tell me.
It's Beren. It's got to be Beren.
Beren.
Yeah.
Oh, I think Turin is much more interesting. I don't think he's a better person.
Stay away from your sister. That's what I have to say.
Fair. Well, yeah, all right, Mr. Game of Thrones over there.
Sorry, Chad, I interrupted. Go ahead.
It says of him that he was consumed by the flame of his own wrath. I mean, that's exciting language. That's more exciting language than you get about most characters in the Silmarillion. And I like this idea that he's sort of he feels like a fundamentally or a character that started good, but he kind of went off the rails, and I just find that very compelling.
He's like a rock star who's so consumed with his own creative spirit that he was bound to burn out. Can I read you a little?
It's hard to lose a sense that he's a good guy to me. I mean, I sort of like, if I think in terms of Dungeons and Dragons or something, he seems sort of like a chaotic good character or something like that. I mean, look, he still wants to destroy Melkor.
But for what reason? I think that's something central to Tolkien, is what's in your heart while you do these acts. Very similar to, Frodo and Smeagol. Like, one big thing with Smeagol Gollum in the Lord of the Rings is, Tolkien is seeing it as the ring was going to get destroyed either way, but the difference is whether Gollum's soul was saved, basically, whether Gollum turned around and he was like, oh, I'm going to help them. But no, he didn't. He did the wrong thing.
Or what's in your heart
destroyed
when you first find the ring has some bearing on its influence over you or something like that.
Right. Something like that.
I thought it was interesting
that has to do with Feanor. Go ahead, Chad.
I thought it was interesting that the chapter kind of speculates almost about whether Melkor was scared when Feanor showed up. And it says no tale is told about what Melkor
what was in his heart, right?
Yeah, right. And I just thought no, he was definitely scared of how could he not be?
Yes, that and also you got to remember, they come with the sun.
Yeah,
the Noldor come with the first rising of the sun, and Melkor's whole army is based on darkness. Like, he needs the darkness to sustain the orcs. So it's kind of like, are they bringing that? Like, he doesn't know what's going on at that point.
I mean, I don't know why Anthony doesn't really like elves very much. But to me, it's very compelling, the idea of an angry elf army showing up with fire in their flame of wrath consuming them.
Okay,
and they show up with
I
the
do
sun.
not like elves. However, I will say, like, for instance, Caranthir is like the perfect example of why elves are pieces of shit. But I will say this, that there's something really cool about Feanor, and I just want to read this little portion. It comes from his death. It says, "Then he died, but he had neither burial nor tomb, for so fiery was his spirit, that as it sped from his body fell to ash, and was borne away like smoke. And his likeness has never again appeared in art, neither as his spirit left the halls of Mandos. Thus ended the mightiest of the Noldor, of whose deeds came both their greatest renown and their most grievous woe." I mean, Tolkien's so fantastic, but he reserves that kind of language just for the characters that he loves most. And I think that Feanor is one of those characters.
I agree. This actually goes back to a concept in Tolkien that's implicit mostly in the Silmarillion and in the main writings, but is spelled out in his extended writings that are published by Christopher after his death. This idea that elves have two elements to their being, and so do men, but it's kind of to a lesser extent. Elves have this Hroa, which is their body energy, and then Fea, which is their spirit energy. And to do great works, elves have to basically burn up their bodies with their spirit. And so the whole point here is Feanor just like goes out in such a blast that his anger and his wrath and his fury at being mortally wounded just burn up his whole body. And that's awesome. And Feanor had more Hroa Fea than basically anybody else, because his mother...
Yeah, his wife. Oh, wait, was his wife or his mother?
His mother died.
His mother, yeah.
Pretty much right after he was born, because she gave up so much of herself into the birth of him.
Right.
that she just couldn't sustain herself anymore.
Yeah, rock star. This guy's a rock star. I mean, he's fantastic. And now that he's gone, and we're dealing with the aftermath, it's I think it's a grievous loss to the story. Now, of course, we're not going to get to my favorite part of the story till another few chapters, but I did want to take a moment to sort of grieve the death, the fiery death of Fëanor.
Well, rip, as they say.
But it does make space for these characters of Fingon and Maedhros. I don't know. I probably don't pronounce them correctly, but
I don't pronounce Maedhros right either, because it bothers me that the DH in Tolkien is supposed to be like the, so it's supposed to be like Maedhros, and that bothers me, so I don't do it.
Right.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
Now
but they're pretty cool, right? These characters that come into his place.
The other part of this chapter that I thought was fantastic that it isn't part of that we're covering today, but just the image of him hanging by his wrist from the cliff.
Yes.
And the connection that he makes with Finrod over the song. Was it Finrod who was singing the song? Oh, right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, you get the idea that song is sort of like deep in the psyche of elves from Valinor.
Right.
And then finding that reunion and immediately saying, kill me.
Yeah.
And then the prayer, and then the rescue. That was just a really fantastic scene.
Yeah. And it really felt very Greek to me. It felt like Orpheus and Eurydice, just trying to find her in the underworld, and beautiful.
It's a beautiful story. And of course, so now he's got one hand, and he's learning to fight with his sword in his left hand, and he's even more deadly than before. And I guess de facto, he's sort of carrying the legacy of his father. And I suppose that's where we pick up.
And Fingon was so brave, right? And he forgives this old friend.
Yeah.
That was very moving to me.
One of the rare times these elves make the right decision, right?
Right. And
I thought
Maedhros. Go ahead.
Something like that was really the theme of the chapter, was this idea that a few key actors make good decisions, and it really pays off.
Mm-hmm. Well, since we're just talking about the first half anyway, what do you think, Chad, of Maedhros giving the kingship to Fingolfin, the father of Fingon?
Yeah, I thought this was incredibly gracious of him, to the way that he sort of conducts himself for the good of everybody, and doesn't let the usual elven ego get in the way. Mm-hmm. And I thought that it was his kind of it was that kind of lack of ego, unusual in an elf, right? That led to really good outcomes for everybody.
Yep.
Right. He goes out into this space where he's, according to the book, he's sort of unprotected. He takes the most kind of dangerous part of the land, and clearly just keeps a watchful eye upon Angband for many centuries, and just ignores the kind of various insults and sort of petty concerns of all the other actors that are involved. And it seemed to me that through these decisions, he was able to bring everybody together.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because it does bring the Noldor more together, but it certainly adds more divisions to the Sons of Fëanor. Like Caranthir and a bunch of the other sons are like, what did you do? Because this was our whole deal here. This is the royal family. We're getting ready for House of the Dragon Season 2, Anthony.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking there's going to be a Dance of the Elves soon, because nobody's happy about who's sitting the throne of the Noldor.
Well, it's one of these interesting bits of political theory that, alliance tends to be viewed as a positive thing politically, but you almost have to make an enemy with any alliance. Like if you ally yourself with a particular people, now you're making their enemies your enemies. And also, you might be creating more divisions with your own people that didn't want the alliance, right? And of course, Tolkien's world is really complex with this. All of these various strands of elves and who came over the sea when, and who
I've got a whole flowchart on it.
Yeah, who's got ownership of the land? I mean, at the heart of this is just this land dispute. Like, does Thingol have the authority to actually tell them where their borders are? And they screw Thingol. I mean, that's basically the idea here,
right?
And of course that you live forever and you hold a grudge forever in the old Elvish tradition, I guess.
Yeah. So Thingol is a really interesting character because he was one of the big three. He was one of the 3 elves that went to Valinor to check it out, to get the free sample before they brought over all the elves. And then he came back to transport everybody, but in the forest he ran into one of the Maiar, Melian, and that became his wife, and he changed his name from Elwë to Thingol, and he's king. And I think his marriage to one of the Maiar and his staying amongst elves that were considered lower than him because he had seen the light of the trees and they hadn't, really makes him a very arrogant character. And really makes him have this ego that makes it difficult for him to ally with anybody.
And it's one of the major themes of Tolkien. He really likes that theme of marrying above your station. Yeah. And he does this with Melian. He's gonna eventually, Baron of Luthien has the same theme. We're gonna find something similar with Aragorn and Arya. Wait. Arwen. Sorry,
wrong universe.
Yeah. Wrong universe. That's right. But he really likes that. He really likes that the woman is above your station, and that marriage may bring about her mortality, or may bring about tragedy. But but I mean, it's one of the most beautiful things in Tolkien's world. Is that you can set aside family for that kind of union at very rare moments.
Yeah.
But Thingol continues to annoy me. But I mean, it's not like these other guys are any much better. But the land dispute is ridiculous.
Right.
Beleriand is basically wild. Give me a break.
Yeah.
So anyway.
But Maedhros laughed, right? Maedhros laughed, saying,
right.
A king is he that can hold his own, or else his title is vain. Right? And he sort of just says, well, and then he goes on to explain, but like his ordering us around is absurd, but it really doesn't matter. And it's to be expected,
Yeah, the question is, who's the Kendrick and who's the Drake in this?
Thingol's totally Drake in this one. But
yeah.
But what ruins the meeting is the calling out of is this Caranthir who says that? He calls
Caranthir basically mocks Angrod and
Angrod's mother. There's something about Angrod's sort of hybridity that he's insecure about, and they can, we know where your father comes from. He comes from where our father came from, but your mother is dirty.
Well, this goes back to the origin of the houses of the Noldor, right? Because Feanor's mother died shortly after his birth, and Finwë, their father, decided to remarry. And that's something that's not super usual. That's not super common in elf culture, and it was very controversial. And because of that, the sons of Feanor see themselves as pure Noldor, and they see their cousin houses as half Noldor, half Vanyar, which is the elves that stayed in Valinor and never came back to Middle Earth, and are a little bit like, ooh, we're so cool, and we sing all day.
So this is one more reason why these guys are annoying and should be called out for what they are.
Well, I've got a question.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So at one point, to me, kind of suddenly, right? It says at Merith Adorthad, many councils were taken in goodwill, and oaths were sworn of league and friendship. And everybody suddenly kind of comes together right there. What these guys have not been able to get along for, this in my book that's 113 pages, and suddenly one paragraph comes and there's this councils of goodwill and oaths and league of league and friendship. What happened?
Well, I believe this is part of the 400-year period where Tolkien's like, yeah, so there were 400 years where Melkor was kept at bay and whatnot. Maybe I'm mixing up the timeline here within the chapter, but my point is I do think that it sometimes gets lost when you read the Silmarillion how many years pass between different sentences because it's so dense.
Right.
In the Elvish parts of it, at least, things happen a little faster with men because they keep dying faster. But here we are, and so there's that, and there is still a sense of duty among the Noldor. I think they're like, all right, let's try to work things out at least.
This is actually 20 years of the sun had passed, I think, unless I'm missing.
Okay. So
this is right at the beginning of and it inaugurates a period of I think a siege of Angband. So it wasn't entirely peaceful,
right.
but a period of cooperation, we'll call it, between these various groups of elves and men, and I don't know, it just seemed out of character in a way, and I sort of wanted to explain it somehow, and
That's a good question.
I found myself reaching for the explanation that, number one, we've just read about Finrod sort of bravely setting aside his problems with Maedhros and saving him, right? Bravely saving him. And then we've read about Maedhros kind of being gracious and taking up the burden of watching Angband. And maybe it was just, my thought was, maybe it was just these good choices on the part of these two that kind of led to a more positive environment where these agreements were possible. I don't know.
Well, also Feanor's dead, right? So he's sort of the hothead. The hothead is not in the room anymore. And his sons are kind of hotheads too, but maybe that fire is a little bit less bright than it was before.
Yeah, it does say, I think at one point it says that Maedhros had let the oath kind of lie passive for a time or something like that. Suggesting that although he remembers that he has this oath that he has to come after Melkor, he's maybe not as fired up about it as his father was.
I've got a question that comes before that text.
Okay.
So Caranthir meets the dwarves of the Blue Mountains, right?
It's Belagos and Nogrod first. They're the Blue Mountain dwarves.
Oh, they come later?
Okay. And that's with Finrod.
Okay. All right. Well, he meets these dwarves, and he's not fond of them because of their unloveliness. I thought that was pretty funny. And but they both hate Morgoth.
Yep.
And they're learning skills from each other. And they're like so into the craft that they're willing to put aside in sort of any surface level unsightliness the dwarves bring to the table. Caranthir is he's a interesting kind of guy. So is this the first alliance between dwarves and elves?
I believe so.
Okay.
Because Thingol does some stuff later, but it's not pretty, and it's not really related to this.
Because I think that the dwarves are mentioned a lot previously, but sort of in passing, and never, it seems, in terms of alliance.
The dwarves, first of all, they're unlovely because basically somebody described the children of Iluvatar to Aule, one of the Valar, and he took a rough approximation based on the description and made the dwarves. So they're just rough approximations of the elves and men.
Also, the universe was young, and so I imagine that Ale is draws like a child. You know how like children's drawings are a little bit off,
right? And so that's why they're so funky looking. But the reason that they don't have alliances, I think they're just like that. They're just kind of grouchy. Like they're in a weird place because sure they know that the other Valar exists, but like one gave them life compared to the elves and men who got life directly from Eru Ilúvatar, the main deity, the main god. They just have this one guy in their court. So I think they're a little distrusting by nature. They also, they're in a weird spot because they were the first to ever awaken, but then they were put to sleep for countless years until everybody else woke up.
Well, on top of that, it's pretty clear that like looks matter in Tolkien's world, right? This is sort of this very old physiognomic point of view that like someone's countenance will reflect the virtue of their soul. And unless they're deceptive, and in that case maybe you can't trust it, but for the most part, you know if you look ugly, you are ugly, you know, you're evil.
Wormtongue wasn't winning any pageants.
That's right. That's right. So it's an odd bit of Tolkien's world, you know, but it kind of makes it feel more authentically medieval, I suppose.
But maybe hobbits are like a weird counterexample.
It's how so?
Well, I mean, they're fat and not handsome, right?
Okay.
And generally physically unimpressive. But they are, you know, it takes Gandalf to see that deep down they have this kind of moral grit, moral fiber. I don't know. I mean, I take your point that it seems like, you know.
You're right. It is a good counterexample.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to mention about this chapter was that, and again, this is a contrast with Lord of the Rings, is that, you know, if you're introduced to this world through The Hobbit and through Lord of the Rings, as most people are, you kind of get the sense that these elves are old and wise and isolationist, and you know, they create songs and crafts, and sort of warlike would be the last thing that you'd think of them. Like, of course, they must have some history, right? And they keep like broken swords on display and things like that. But when you pick up the Silmarillion, it's just like one war after the next. This chapter is just describing all of the times they went to war. And I would just, you know, if you, I guess the first guy you come across is what's his name?
Feanor?
Well, I was thinking like Celegorn or Galadriel, or these people. When you walk in, let's say you walk into their forest and you first encounter Celegorn, you're not, warlike is the last thing you're thinking of these people. You know, they're almost like transcendent, and they almost are uninvolved with the wars of men and dwarves and orcs and what. But in this chapter, they are just bellicose. They are absolutely bellicose in this chapter.
I agree with you. I think that the point here is that these elves are young, and these elves are hot-headed because they are of the Noldor, and they are of Feanor. And once the Feanorians are gone, because, you know, by the Second Age, there's one descendant of Feanor.
They're not just that, they're territorial. They're grudge holding. they're quick to take slight. Like, I guess that's all kind of bespeaks immaturity, right? But it's not like they're just going to war because, someone insulted the honor of, my house or my father, or someone besmirched the purity of my whatever it is. They're going to war for really petty reasons, these elves. I'm just really struck by that in this chapter.
Yeah, it's really strange. I think part of it is they felt a little suffocated by the Valar. The Valar said you get this part of Valinor and that's it, and you're not allowed to go back. And so it's kind of like a teenager moving out for the first time, and they just want to do everything. They want to throw their beer cans on the floor and put alcohol bottles up as decorations, because we all did that at some point. And that's where they are in life,
Okay.
That's where I'm at. Can I ask you, Anthony, since you're the House of the Dragon guy?
Yeah.
Did the Merith Atterthad, the Feast of Reuniting, did that give you the vibes of the end of episode 8 of House of the Dragon, where Viserys brings everybody together and goes, "Now kiss"?
I wouldn't have thought of it in those terms, but like when you pointed that out to me, I think that has some merit. In addition to that, I thought that the vision given by Ulmo had some House of the Dragon vibes.
Mm-hmm.
There's some kind of prophecy that eventually some dark, horrible thing is going to happen, and it's up to you to prepare for this thing that's going to happen, although it's very vague.
Right.
And in addition to that, there's a little bit of confusion about who is the carrier of the prophecy. Like the two guys that get the vision, they don't talk about it with each other. So there's some kind of misunderstanding between them about it. So that kind of gave me House of the Dragon vibes a little.
Yeah, I mean, Turgon and Finrod, this is the next bullet point I had anyway. They each receive, it sounds like personalized visions to me from Ulmo. Like these were sort of, you get one. Finrod then becomes a guest of Thingol, who tells Finrod about the caves around the river Narog. Finrod leaves and forms Nargothrond, an elvish stronghold, with the helps of the dwarves of the Blue Mountain. He pays them with treasures from Valinor, and they form him a great necklace called the Nauglamir. Remember that one. Finrod earns the title of Felagund from the dwarves. So a lot here, but I wanted to go through this Nargothrond thing because the Nauglamir is going to be an important deal later.
Yeah, I don't remember why. What can you remind me what this necklace is? What the importance of this necklace is?
It will one day have to do with Thingol's downfall.
Oh, I'm gonna have to reread that part. I don't remember.
Yeah, it's a whole thing with the dwarves and the Nauglamir. So I don't want to spoil it too much because I'm trying to go like light spoilers through the Silmarillion here on the pod, but it's going to be important. That's why I pointed out now. Track it.
Okay, all right.
So Finrod's got his realm, and that's where he's going to be for the rest of the First Age. Turgon, on the other hand, is guided by Ulmo to the hidden vale of Tumladen, where he's going to found Gondolin, the closest thing to Tyrion in Valinor that Middle-earth ever had. And I'll just state for listeners, this is the subject of The Fall of Gondolin, which is one of the 3 great tales that Tolkien wrote like a full version of. It's basically a full novel, and Christopher then released in the early 2000s.
Okay, I got a question about this. So, it's really hard to find that Ulmo guides him to the Vale, and then the hill is described as a hill of stone. Am I to take this to mean that the whole thing is one solid rock?
Good question. I guess. If you look at the artwork behind Gondolin, it is pretty stony. So maybe that's the intention. I never thought about that, though.
I'm just trying to imagine, like, is this a city that's sort of like, like a sculpture that's like all it's all carved out of one piece of wood or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if I should imagine this as a city that is an actual sculpture. I don't know. I'm not really sure if I'm reading that correctly, but when it said a hill of stone, what I imagined is sort of like super white, single, solid rock. But it could be that that's just what I'm imagining.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. I think that is the intention, that this is carved out of the rock.
Okay.
And if someone wants to write in and correct me, lotr@thelorehounds.com. Any other thoughts on Chad? I want to go to you. Are you familiar with the whole Nargothrond Gondolin deal? Are you familiar with any of these tales, and what do they mean?
No, I'm really not. Yeah, I'm really not.
I have a question about Ulmo. I want to throw at you guys.
You got it.
Ulmo is an interesting deity in that he's a little bit more hands-on. Would that be a right way to think about Ulmo? He's a little bit more hands-on than the rest of these, the pantheon of gods.
He's got a little bit of a Prometheus vibe.
Okay.
Right? He's wants to help the children of Iluvatar. He's giving them messages in the water. It's said, I think, in Of Men that like the elves can basically understand what Ulmo's saying in the water, but the men are just like, well, that seems pretty. That seems nice. Yeah, he's the only one who really visits and helps for a long time after the Valar are angry at the Noldor.
So what makes him different? I mean, he's one of the original pantheon. We did see in this chapter Manwë kind of intercede, but really only sending emissaries. Sending Great Eagle to do his bidding. Ulmo shows up, right? He's got rumors and news by way of waterways that he's gathering. He shows up. He gives these guys visions. He guides them to secret places. He's fundamentally different than the other gods of this pantheon. And should I read this as sort of he cares about the fates of these peoples more than the rest, or is it his job to do this? I don't know really how to read him.
He's a little bit rogue among the Valar. He's not usually around in councils. He, if you'll recall, was the one who ferried the elves across the sea to Valinor. He's also one of the very few number of Valar who thought that they should just let the elves live in Middle-earth and not bring them over and just help heal that world. And so he's a little bit of a wild card. He's always been like this. Like he anchors Tol Eressëa, the Lost Isle, near Valinor, so that the elves have their own special island too. So he's just kind of like this. Like he's an all around good guy, and also the elves awoke in water, so I think he has a bit of a special bond with them.
I didn't remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you suppose that Ulmo is incapable of helping them penetrate Angband? It seems as if Angband is this sort of impenetrable force, right? They're able to beat him back into it, but at a certain point they just kind of hit a wall, trying to take him out, trying to take Melkor out. Are deities on the level of Ulmo scared of Melkor?
I think so. Melkor is the most powerful of all of them. And I think that's the point. Is it's sad that he fell to darkness, because he could have been so great, right? He could have been like the Vala in charge of men, but he wasn't. He fell to darkness. He looked into the void too long, and he went crazy. And so really only Manwë and Melkor have the knowledge of all the parts of the mind of Iluvatar, of the deity.
Mm-hmm.
then the others really only have a portion. And I don't think most of them are really that into fighting either. Tulkas is really the only one who's like, let's go get him.
Right. So that's my question. It's like there was this effort to go find him. Tulkas couldn't find him. And then Tulkas basically drops out of the narrative.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so it's not Ulmo's thing to like go to war, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of odd because I you would think like the sea god would also be warlike, but not in this world.
Right.
But a lot of these gods just check out. And I mean, I don't really know what to do with that information. I guess
you
I
added
appreciate
to the case against Manwë that I've been building this entire series.
Okay, so tell me the case against Manwë.
This is a recurring theme that I bring up, which is Manwë is not a very good leader. He's extremely passive, and he lets things fester before making them resolve because he's worried about short-term consequences. Like the Valar deliberately do not interfere with Melkor because they saw the destruction of Middle-earth during the original wars, the Wars of the Powers. And so they're just like, we don't want to destroy Middle-earth again, especially now that it's more populated with elves and men. I think it's short-sighted. I mean, they're eventually going to have to do that anyway. That happens eventually. They're going to take them down. So they basically just let everyone build up, and then they go, okay, now we'll go to war and destroy this whole area.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it doesn't. It would sort of ruin the story if you've got this ex machina, ascend from the clouds, but on occasion the eagles do that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But to keep Ulmo in the story is almost a reminder of how bad Manwë is.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it'd be one thing if the deities are just they're off doing their own thing. And these little squabbles that the elves and dwarves and orcs have are not the matters that deities concern themselves with. But Ulmo is the counterfactual here. Right. Clearly, some of them do care. So clearly, some of them do take interest.
Yeah.
So it just makes Manwë look really bad, I guess.
Well, and Manwë does interfere at some points, right? Like he sent the eagle to help Fingon and Maedhros. But yeah,
I guess in some way my question is, why don't they help more? But maybe you've answered that. I mean, maybe they're just worried that they're going to provoke some kind of catastrophic destruction.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta, and this is the case that's been levied as a defense of Manwë by Marilyn Arbukila, among others. But basically every time they intervene, something bad happens. So they're kind of just like, well, maybe we should just stop poking around in here.
Mm-hmm.
Like they had this beautiful place in the middle of Middle Earth, Alqualande, and they had these lamps that lit everything equally with holy light, and then Melkor destroyed that. And then they tried to bring the elves over to save them from the destruction of Manwë, of Melkor rather, and the whole Silmaril Feanor nonsense happened. Then they capture Melkor and they bring him back as prisoner, and they think he's rehabilitated, and they set him free, and he destroys the two trees, and they're in darkness. So every time they take direct action in this, something bad has happened. So I think that they just get really nervous about it.
Do you remember in Lord of the Rings when Gandalf says something? I think he's talking to Frodo about how maybe Frodo was meant to have the ring, and that's an encouraging thought or something like that.
Yeah.
I believe that's in the book, right? That's not just the movie that I'm reading.
I believe so. There's all these different calls to the hand of Eru Ilúvatar sort of tilting the scale a little bit,
Okay, so you think when Gandalf says that, he's talking about Ilúvatar?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's not the Valar. That's Ilúvatar. That is Ilúvatar saying, like, I'm just going to nudge you a little bit this way, I'm going to make sure that Gollum trips on a rock and falls into Mount Doom.
Is it possible that Gandalf would believe in some force that was not Ilúvatar or the Valar?
I don't think so. He is one of the Maiar. Right. So he is part of this holy energy, and therefore would have known Iluvatar at one point, like personally.
Yeah.
Like he came from this holy energy.
Okay.
So I don't think so.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I wonder if you could explain the hesitancy of the Valar to get involved. Likewise, by their kind of deference to whatever the plan, the sort of unknown plan of the seemingly uninvolved, but evidently in some way involved high god.
I think they're just really like they were set there not to like they deliberately were not told when the children of Iluvatar were going to wake up because Eru Iluvatar did not want his children, the elves and men, to become like mini Valar and mini Maiar. He wanted them to have their own free will and be able to develop their own cultures, and they do, and they invent speech and all these incredible things that the Valar had never even thought of. But then the Valar go, okay, well, we don't really think that it's the time to solve the problem of Morgoth, so we're going to bring you all over here. And that causes so many problems, and they just keep causing all these problems. So I really do think it's a matter of an abundance of caution and a fear of causing unnecessary collateral damage. Because arguably, Feanor never comes over. He never sees or he was born on Valinor, but you know what I mean? He's never there. He never sees the trees and therefore is never able to make the Silmarils, and therefore there's no thing to fight over, right? There's no holy energy to fight over. A lot of this came from the intervention of the Valar.
Yeah.
I did some research on this before, like earlier today, and I couldn't find an answer to this. So maybe you can answer this.
Okay.
John. Who or what is the Silmarillion?
It's the tale of the Silmarils.
So, but it's not named after the creator of the Silmarils. It's not the actual.
It's not the Feanorian.
All right.
Doesn't really roll off the tongue.
So it's the whole tale, and it has no referent to like for instance, the Lord of the Rings refers to some kind of lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if the Silmarillion referred to some person or thing within the story itself.
No, I believe it just is basically the tale of the Silmarils. Okay. Where did they go? What conflict did they cause? And I think the whole point of it being named after the Silmarils is just Feanor created them, but really the sons of Feanor had a lot more to do with what ends up happening to them. Other people, like men, like Beren and Turin. Turin's not as Silmarillion, but you know what I mean. Other individuals that are not of the House of Feanor ended up having a really big impact on what happens to the world based on these Silmarils. So I think he just saw those as the core of the identity of this story. The core driving force behind this story, I guess.
It's kind of I don't know if it's a failure on the part of Feanor's sons, or if it's a failure on the part of Thingol, or if it's a failure on the part of the Valar. I don't know what to make of it, but the fact that Morgoth is isolated, almost totally surrounded, not totally surrounded, but almost totally surrounded. He doesn't have any power beyond his own walls.
Mm-hmm.
And yet for 400 years, they have this siege and they can't quite vanquish him. It just seems like a major, major defeat I guess by way of attrition or something like that.
Yeah. And again, I think it's just that, when they finally do, at the end of the First Age, when they finally do take action, it does destroy like an entire continent.
Right.
An entire part of a continent. Like Beleriand's gone at the end of the First Age because of their action. And so I think they're basically like, we don't want to light a nuke if we don't have to. And if the Noldor are keeping him at bay and there's not a lot of suffering over there, maybe we just leave it for now. It's only later when they're explicitly, first of all, they're never asked for help. That's one thing. Like the Noldor never go like, can you help us defeat Morgoth? Until Eärendil comes with the Silmaril and says, please, on behalf of men and elves, help us defeat Morgoth. You're the only ones who can do it. And then they immediately go. So maybe that's the answer, is nobody ever asked. And they don't want to intervene without being asked anymore.
I thought it was an interesting detail in this chapter that, all right, so Morgoth is surrounded. He's basically held at bay. But on occasion, he can send his goons out and capture an elf.
It's the Joe Pesci orcs, by the way, going around and capturing everybody.
Okay. So they send the goons out, it captures an elf, brings the elf to Morgoth, and the terror of his eyes can change their allegiance.
It basically just scares them into submission.
It scares them into submission, but once they leave, they will do his will, no matter where they go. I thought that was a really interesting detail. And, sometimes I wonder, how do these creatures actually become evil? Right. But, that he's got that kind of Svengali power over. And I'll be honest, until I read this chapter, I had always had a major problem with the way that the movies of Lord of the Rings end. Where they kill the big baddie and then everyone sort of is the spell's broken and they all run away. Right. So, you don't really have to finish the battle because all of the minions are going to scatter once you've killed Big Baddie. And I never got that sense from reading the book that that's actually how it goes down. But in this chapter, you see that there's something about the eyes of Morgoth that absolutely controls the will of his servants. Yeah.
And if Sauron were at his full power with the ring, he'd also be able to dominate people, not just with rings. But that's a whole thing. Like, the whole point of Sauron forging the One Ring was to pour all of his power into the power of domination.
It's a very Tolkien thing to do, to make the big baddie like he holds some kind of psychological power more than he actually is strong of arm or something. Right. It's all about the coming of the sun, or the fear that controls the hearts of men. It's all very psychological, rather than just sort of brute force.
Right. And I've always liked that, but yeah, we get another battle, as you say, the Dagor Aglareb, the glorious battle. He's great at naming these battles. I don't know if you've ever listened to the Silmarillion audiobook. There's one narrated by Andy Serkis now, but the classic one is the one that I like. And that's the only reason I can pronounce any of this, because it's so tough if you don't listen.
Is this the one by Martin Shaw?
I believe so.
All right, that's what Audible has.
Yes, yeah. But so the battles, when he reads them, are so the Dagor Aglareb, and you just get the sense that this was this great battle that just went down in legend. Remember the Dagor Aglareb? That was insane, Maedhros.
And then, of course, we have the sort of a sneak peek of Glaurung. Not supposed to reveal himself yet, but he's young and impetuous. Can't wait to get out and show what.
So where does he come? Where does he come from?
He's a fire drake. I don't know. There's a lot of creations that come out of Morgoth and Thangorodrim that just, you're like, where do these come from? The Balrogs, at least we know, were fire Maiar. They are on the same level as Gandalf, and that's why they're able to fight like that. But I don't know where the fire drakes came from, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
I mean, I just assumed that Morgoth is sort of raising a litter of dragons.
And, he does have the power to shape the world. So I'm sure he's just all right, well, you lizard, you can shoot fire now, and you have wings.
Right, and they grow long. The lives of fire drakes are slow and long. Right, it takes a long time to get these these things battle ready.
But I do like that he's smart, right? Like he can make the decision to go out and terrorize.
Yeah, he's got a will of his own, right?
Yeah. And Fingon, of course. Fingon's doing work this chapter. He saves Maedhros, and now he's back to fight off a dragon and send him back to Angband. All around good guy Fingon.
Still great guy. Still not as interesting as Feanor.
It's just
fair enough.
I think dragons are interesting because we learn from later when we get a much more a much richer picture of a dragon in The Hobbit. Like they're smart, right? And they're crafty, and they're much more than just big monsters, right?
They can cast spells, right?
Yeah, they're sophisticated. They're discerning. They're in their own way. They're sort of wise.
They find the humor, right? They clearly have a sense of humor,
right? They're different than orcs, right?
Right.
They have they have a little bit more substantial personality. So I don't know. I wonder if there was something special about whatever it is that Melkor did to create this thing.
Well, I also want to point out that Melkor, this is not the first time that he's allied or created something that he does not have enough control over. Like, think about his adventures with Ungoliant. Ungoliant's like, all right, now come here, I'm going to eat you. And he only barely escapes that.
Right. I've got a question about dragons. All right, so I think I forget the name of the dragon, but Turin has to face a dragon without wings. And this dragon that we meet in this chapter, it's not mentioned whether there's wings or not wings. And should I assume that if it's not mentioned, I should imagine these dragons as having wings? It goes out of the way that says it's a fire-breathing dragon, right? No mention of wings, and so I'm wondering, is that the default?
Good question. Well, Glaurung is the dragon that he faces.
That's the same dragon that Turin faces later. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just verified it because I was like, I think it's the same dragon, and it is.
So it's specified in that later. I guess it's an independent book that I read. I don't know what the chapter in this book says, but it's specified in that chapter that Glaurung is wingless.
Yeah, I don't recall that from the Silmarillion, but maybe it's in. Did you read the Children of Húrin?
I think that's probably where I got that information.
So that's an interesting independent work because there's like 3 versions of the tale in it. It's not. Isn't that true? Isn't that what they do with it? Or is that what they do in Beren and Luthien? I don't remember.
Yeah. The Beren and Luthien book, there's 3 different versions.
Never mind. But it is slightly different, I think, because it's so expanded. But yeah, I didn't recall that. So now I got to go look this up.
So I could be making that up. Don't take my word for it. But I seem to remember that was the case. And then it made me think, like, do dragons in Tolkien's world usually have wings? Or is that sort of a special innovation that we find out these later fire drakes?
I think they do. I think they do have wings because I got the sense that Glaurung was flying around causing havoc here.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Or maybe I just assume though because I'm watching too much House of the Dragon.
I don't think it's mentioned. But of course, someone will correct me. I'm sure if I got this wrong.
It says after they beat back, baby dragon or whatever, that few foresaw the full meaning and threat of this new thing. I suppose that's sort of foreshadowing all the trouble they'll have with dragons in the subsequent centuries. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with all the tales of dragons. I know what happens in The Hobbit. But.
There's really not a lot of dragon action. I think the part of it is Tolkien was really focused on the character drama and the politics of this. And when he has a battle, as you've seen, we had 2 battles in this chapter and they lasted a paragraph each. That's just what he does, right? He's like, and it was a crazy battle and there were dragons and everybody went home and these people died. So that's just his style.
So this is the passage. All right. Again, after 100 years clattering, the first of the Uruk Loki, the fire drakes of the north, issued from Angband's gates at night. So he goes to the gates. That's interesting. He was yet young and scarce half grown, for long and slow is the life of dragons. But the elves fled before him to arid Withrin, and Dorthonion in dismay.
Dorthonion.
Yeah, thanks. And he defiled the fields of Ard Galen. So there's nothing that says about him flying around, I guess.
I'm just implying some wings here.
Yeah. And Fingon, prince of Hithlum, rode against him with archers on horseback and hemmed him around with a ring of swift riders. Yeah, this is a wingless dragon. And Glaurung could not endure their darts. Anyway. It's an odd bit of the mythology that I never quite understood. Like, why does this particular dragon not have wings?
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm gonna have to come back to you on that because that's an interesting point that I've never considered.
Maybe it's because he's young. He's still growing.
But then when he meets Turin later, he still doesn't have wings.
Right.
So anyway, it could be that the wings are an innovation. These baddies in Middle Earth are always trying to upgrade their weaponry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
it seems like there's an implication in this story that dragons are tougher than Balrog. Do you agree with that?
That dragons are what?
Tougher than
Balrogs.
Yeah.
Because
he's got a bunch of Balrogs, right? And he
does have a bunch of. That's a good question. I don't think so because Balrogs are Maiar, so they're like immortal.
But okay, that's an interesting question. I think that the idea here is that they don't really know what to do with this thing, and they're able to hold it back, but they don't quite understand how to fight these things yet. Yeah, or sort of like maybe the Balrog is. I don't know how to measure these things because you would think like almost one of the most powerful creatures in all of Middle Earth, and he zips around and gives people visions. So, like, I don't know if I should measure someone's sort of hierarchy in the pantheon with their ability to have battlefield prowess.
Right?
Sure.
Well, and then you have these weird categories. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, in this particular conflict that Melkor is having, he's feeling discouraged, right? He's just been beaten. He feels in his heart that he sees in his heart that he's not going to be successful continuing to fight with these elves. And so he retreats and he comes up with a new idea. And his new idea is this dragon. And it just seems weird if you tell the story like this. If you say, well, in terms of battlefield prowess, the Balrogs are really, really powerful. And then he can't overcome them with his group of Balrogs, so he goes back and comes up with a new idea, a weaker being a dragon. That seems like a weird way to understand the story. So it seems like he must think the dragon has greater battlefield prowess than...
Maybe it's because it's got the air game, if they do have wings.
I don't know about that, Chad. Let's say you've got a bunch of long swords, and it doesn't mean like you don't need your armor to create a dagger, because it would serve a different purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe the dragons are just really scary, so there's a kind of psychological element.
Yeah, that's true. Well,
but I don't know. I mean,
I'm sure that John will do some research for us.
I will. I'll get back to you
and mention it on a future podcast.
Right? Yep.
I don't feel like Gandalf could have held back Smog at the bridge, but he did hold back at Balrog. So
well. But here's the thing. Gandalf was allowed to use his power against the Balrog because that was a being of his same class. He was not allowed to use his powers against beings of Middle-earth.
I see. Okay, I didn't know that.
Is that right? It's sort of like a weight class kind of thing? Like you only get to wrestle people in your weight class.
I believe that's part of his restrictions because Gandalf is an Istar. He's one of the Istari. So he was one of 5 special Maiar who were sent out on a mission by the Valar to go to Middle Earth, take on mortal bodies. So that's why Gandalf can die. They take on mortal bodies, but they're like perpetually immortal. So
but there's some sort of like code of ethics regarding the kind of force that they can use.
I believe that's right. They're not supposed to directly intervene. They're supposed to massage the peoples of Middle Earth into doing the right thing.
Well, these Astari are total failures. They're actually absolutely intervening, right?
Well, Gandalf succeeds. Gandalf is the most successful of all of them.
Wait, are these rules only for the good guys, or are the Balrogs also constrained by these rules?
The Balrogs are not constrained because they're just Maiar, but they're out in the world rogue.
Okay.
Basically Gandalf and his buddies were given these mortal bodies and said, like, here's your restrictions. Go and massage this, because again, the Valar remain cautious in the Third Age, even more so. There's nonsense that happens in the Second Age that makes them even more cautious.
I'm going to take issue with this. He does more than massage the events of Middle Earth. He absolutely intervenes. He runs around with a sword. He strikes fear into the heart of orcs, and
he sets pine cones on fire.
Yeah.
he sets pine cones on fire, John.
He's allowed to use some tricks, but he's not allowed to like go full, Super Saiyan on anybody but somebody who's also a Saiyan. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know. Look, I'm making my point again here. I don't think that even Gandalf, with the powers that he displays in that interaction with the Balrog, I don't think he could have held back a full-fledged dragon. I don't think so.
Fair enough.
Well, I don't think that would be his move anyway. He would try to like outriddle the dragon or something.
Yeah.
He would try to outwit it.
He would try to be incredibly British as Sir Ian McKellen. Just disgustingly British.
Oh man, this is fun. I'm glad we did this.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up the chapter. Beleriand lives in peace for a long time after that. But of course, Tolkien has one more note, which is that the Sindar are definitely better at music than the Noldor, except he wants us to also know that with Maglor, this guy plucks.
Really funny.
He loves it. He just wants Maglor to be king of the castle when it comes to music.
I love that there's like everyone agrees that these guys are better than those guys. like at one point in the chapter, it says that the Noldor are better with languages. Was that it? Was that what I read?
It's basically there's two languages. There's two main languages right now. There's Quenya and Sindarin, and the people who speak Quenya are better at learning Sindarin than the people who speak Sindarin are at learning Quenya.
Yeah, the Sindarin, those of the Sindarin tongue just kind of suck at language acquisition.
Yeah,
but they're great at composing music. I don't know. It's just
except Maglor. Don't go up against Maglor. You got to remember that this is an in-universe text, and so it's basically just Noldor propaganda.
Sure. Okay.
And in fact, one of my fan theories about Rings of Power is that it's even more Noldor propaganda, which is why at the beginning of Rings of Power they go, and then we just sailed to Middle Earth to take on Melkor. They don't talk about the kinslaying or the oath or anything like that.
Or the land acquisition.
Right.
Yeah.
They're just like, we definitely went after the bad guy. That happened.
Hey, wait, I have a quick question about the kinslaying thing.
Okay.
I feel like, correct me if you don't have this impression, that would be interesting too, but I have this impression that almost all the time when it comes up in the book, they talk more about how the ships got burned than they do about the killing of the kin.
Well, it does come up soon. Again, I think the next chapter with Thingol, because remember, Thingol was actually Elwë, who's the head of the Teleri, who are the ones who built the ships.
Yeah.
And who are the ones who were the victims in the kinslaying. And
it just seems weird that there's such an emphasis on the loss of the ships. Like, you would think that the ships wouldn't really be on anybody's radar. It's the murdering of your kin that would be really upsetting. It's like, I don't know. That surprises me, and I feel like maybe there's some reason. Were the ships special in a way that I don't understand? Or
They were in the sense that, you know how Feanor can't make more Silmarils because that was like his, beef. That was his whole being put into there. Same deal with the Teleri and their ships.
Okay.
Same deal with the Felmari and their ships. So he destroyed their creation. And it's really insult to injury because Feanor left the rest of the Noldor in Valinor. They're like, maybe we should send these ships back for them. No, just burn them. Burn them.
Wow. Okay. And that helps me understand that a little bit better. I mean, it does help it helps us understand why these elves are so attached to the things that they create.
Right. They pour their being.
Yeah, it's actually them, an extension of their own souls, these things. Right.
Yep. It's interesting stuff.
One of the random questions.
Oh, go ahead.
One of the random questions. There's this reference to Thingol's girdle of enchantment.
Oh, yeah.
Do we know what that is exactly?
We love the girdle. Yeah, it's described in an earlier chapter. This is because he's married to Melian, one of the Maiar. She sets this girdle of enchantment, which is just this ring around Doriath that makes it basically impossible to find your way through unless you have a guide.
Yeah, but it looks like a big piece of clothing, right?
If you say so.
That's how I like to imagine it. I wonder what's behind that big girdle. No one knows.
Any other thoughts besides girdles on this chapter?
Yeah, just one more R.I.P. to Feanor. Just incredible loss, and I don't know. I feel sad. He was kind of a complicated character. I mean, he's definitely a bad guy at times, but I feel sad. I feel sad that this book is moving on without him.
Well, and of course, we did learn too that the elves go back to the halls of Mandos, and they often can be given new bodies and allowed to roam in Valinor.
Not Feanor.
Feanor is so goddamn cranky that he's been sitting there ever since. He never leaves.
His fires burn so hot that there's just nothing else to do with.
I've seen people say that they want a buddy comedy between, like a roommates comedy with Mandos and Feanor, like the Grim Reaper plus this cranky guy.
That's funny. Thanks, John. I appreciate you inviting us.
Thank you. Where can we find both of you? I'm going to let Chad go first because he's the new guy to this podcast.
Oh, yeah, I guess you can find all my work on Phil Papers. I've written some philosophy. You can read there if you're interested.
Very cool.
That's about it.
You could check out my podcast, Properly Howard, where me and my stand-up comic friend Steve review crappy 80s movies and a few other movies too. And then, of course, I'm doing a chapter-by-chapter reread of A Song of Ice and Fire, and I invite on professional medievalists and philosophers like Chad to help me cover those chapters.
Very
Electric
nice.
Bookaloo is what that's.
So I'll throw in, we already have a Properly Howard link in the show notes because they're one of our affiliates. I'll throw in an Electric Bookaloo link. And Chad, if you want to send me a link to your work, I'll throw that in the show notes too.
No problem.
All right. Thanks, folks. Good talking to you.
Super fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, that was a lovely conversation with Anthony and Chad. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I just want to do our quick outro. Don't forget, we have plenty going on the Lorehounds Network. We've got Radioactive Ramblings covering the boys. We've got Alicia on her Star Wars Canon Timeline podcast covering the Acolyte with me co-hosting. And that's also on the Lorehounds feed. David and I are doing House of the Dragon. Marilyn is going through Rings of Power Season 1 in Rings and Rituals, so definitely check out that feed. Anthony, who you heard today, is doing Felonies and Fugazis with Properly Howard, and that's going strong. So there's plenty of stuff going on. This is Hot Lore Summer. I want to also give a thank you to all of our Patreon and Supercast subscribers, and to our Discord server boosters. Starting with the Discord server boosters, we have Gnarls, Aaron K, Tiller the Thriller, Dork of the Ninjas, Duve71, Captain Gingy 56, Athena A, And our lore masters are Samartian, Michael G, Michelle E, David W, Brian P, SC, Peter OH, Bettina W, Adam S, Nancy M, Duve71, Brian 8063, Frederick H, Sarah L, Gareth C, Eric F, Matthew M, Sarah M, DJ Miwa, Andra B, Kwang Yu, Deadeye Jedi Bob, Nathan T, Alex V, Aaron T, Sub-Zero, Aaron K, Dally V, Mothership 61, Gnarls, Kathy W, and Adrian. Thank you all. Thanks for all your support. Next month, we'll be back with New Beta Do Beta to talk about Beleriand and its realms. See you then. The Lorehounds podcast is produced and published by The Lorehounds. You can send questions and feedback and voicemails at thelorehounds.com/contact. Get early and ad-free access to all Lorehounds podcasts at patreon.com/thelorehounds. Any opinions stated are ours personally and do not reflect the opinion of or belong to any employers or other entities. Thanks for listening. This summer, we enter a new era of Star Wars.
You mean the Dawn of the Star Wars Canon Timeline podcast?
Yeah, sure, that too. But I was obviously talking about the Acolyte. We've got to cover that on the Lorehounds.
Oh, but the Star Wars Canon Timeline podcast is exactly at that point in the timeline, the end of the High Republic, 100 years before the prequel trilogy. We've got to cover it there.
Why not both?
Okay, deal.
It's the first live-action Star Wars outside the Skywalker saga. Nobody can miss this.
Listeners, kick off your hot lore summer weekends with scene-by-scene breakdowns of the Acolyte, found in both the Star Wars Canon Timeline podcast and the Lorehounds Mother feed.
And the Lorehounds Star Wars feed.
Wherever you like to listen, a couple of days after each new episode is released.